Welcome to Unpacking the Athlete podcast, hosted by yours truly, Rob Martin. Welcome to Unpacking the Athlete, a podcast dedicated to diving deep into what makes athletes who they are. Today's guest, someone who has made a lifetime career out of the sport of bikes. Here are some of his career highlights, not in any particular order. In 2001, he placed 17th at the Sea Otter Classic. In 2004, he won the Triple Crown. In 2014, he won the Grand Junction Fat Tire Crit and third in the off-road. In 08-09, he had his first CX season in Belgium. CX is cyclocross. And he has won the coveted Iceman multiple times. Our guest today is Brian Motter. Welcome, Brian. I can't wait to learn more about you and your love for the bike.
Awesome. Thanks for having me.
Glad you could be here. I always start with kind of a funny question, and yours isn't an exception. So we're going to think about Iceman this year. And if everyone would have to race Iceman this year on the same bike, I've got three choices. Which bike would you want to throw down with everyone on? Number one of those mountain bikes with the 26-inch tires from the 90s. Number two, a modern-day full suspension. Or number three, a gravel bike with slightly wider tires and no suspension.
Oh, I would definitely have to say option one. I mean, I kind of consider myself an old school racer, and I might even have considered myself like the final holdout in 26-inch wheels. I might have been the last guy to be on 26-inch wheels on the Iceman podium. So that one is a super easy answer for me.
Nice. That's awesome. I had a feeling that you might pick that just because of the old schoolness going on there. I like that. So what year did you finally switch off from the 26-inch tires? Do you remember?
I would say I remember dabbling with the 29er around 2008. I was racing a couple guys in Wisconsin, Jesse Lalonde and Mark Lalonde. They were big on 29er single speeds, and they beat me a couple times. And I was like, man, it's got to be the bike. I got to switch to this 29er thing. So I remember getting a 29er hardtail 2008, and I absolutely did not like it at all, and probably went back to my 26-inch top fuel for a couple years. You know, I even remember hoarding a couple 26-inch wheel sets and buying an extra 26-inch frame when I knew those products were going to be disappearing. So I don't know, maybe it was around 2010, 2011 that I finally switched full on to the 29er.
Nice. So you totally skipped the 27.5 and just went to the 29 then, basically?
Yeah. I rode a 27.5 a little bit, but at the time, Trek, obviously my main sponsor, did not do a lot of 27.5 at that high end. You know, they kind of went directly to the 29er, and anything 27.5 from Trek was more in the trail bike department.
Okay.
So I had some fun trail bikes that were 27.5s, but the race bike, again, I was a holdout, and then probably, around 2010, 2011, made that jump.
Nice. Okay, so for everyone listening, if you're riding in the pro race this year, you have to be on a 26-inch bike.
I still have one. I've got 1995. Actually, just put an Instagram post up just the other day. One of my first bikes was a 1995 Merlin Titanium. It's actually the only bike throughout my career that I've kind of kept and loved forever. So I do have that 26-inch option for Iceman this year. If
Nice.
You can convince, the crew at Iceman that it's mandatory for everybody to do it, I've got my favorite bike lined up.
Nice. This might be something. This might be kind of fun, actually. Can you explain to everybody what the Triple Crown is and how you ended up winning that?
Sure. So Triple Crown, back in the day, I did a lot of traveling with a buddy from Wisconsin named Tristan Scouten. And Tristan and I, did a lot of cyclocross, did a lot of mountain biking in the Midwest. And around 2003, I think was the first year we did Ortashore, Shawamagan, and Iceman. So those are kind of the three classic point to point races in the Midwest. Ortashore is in Marquette, Michigan. It's a 50-mile point to point race, and it's in August. The next one is Shawamagan. That is a point to point race in northern Wisconsin. That one's 40 miles. And then the Triple Crown kind of finishes with Iceman, which is another point to point at 30 miles. So each race gets a little bit shorter in duration, but more intense. And I think just around 2003, cyclocross was big, and we did a stop in Louisville, Kentucky. So Triple Crown and horse racing was in our minds. And then just one day, Tristan and I just joking around like, oh, we need to call this the Triple Crown. And it really stuck. That name stuck. And I think it's inspired a lot of people to actually do all three of those races. And then in 2004, somehow I managed to win all three of them in the same year. I think the total winning margin in all three races was less than 5 seconds or something like that. Like each race was super close and came down to a sprint finish. So it was like by the hair of my teeth that I was able to pull it off. And since 2004, nobody else has been able to do that.
That's pretty epic right there. After the first two wins, and you were going into Iceman after you guys named it the Triple Crown, what were your thoughts going into that Iceman? Do you think, can I pull this off? Did you have a strategy?
Oh, I had to. Like it was like, this is never going to happen again. I got to do it. So yeah, I was all in to win it. Tristan had actually won a super snowy Iceman in 2003, the year before. So we were just in this zone of like any race that Tristan and I would go to, we really honestly felt like we had a chance to win. So, heading into that 2004 Iceman, I definitely felt a lot of pressure. Somehow was able to come over the top of Jesse Jackamate, who's a Canadian rider, and come away with the victory. I passed him, a similar move that I've made in a lot of Iceman races, up the icebreaker, and held on for the victory.
Yeah, nice. The legend Brian Motter, man. This is so cool. I'm so excited to have you on to hear about these stories that I didn't know about.
Yeah, there's a lot of them. I've been doing it for a long time, that's for sure.
Can you take us back to that 2001 Sea Otter Classic and talk about why that holds a special place for you?
Yeah, so 2001 Sea Otter Classic. Back in the day, Sea Otter was a absolutely huge event. I mean, it still is now. In 2000, probably maybe 1999, 2000, 2001, Sea Otter attracted all of the best European racers. So more or less, Sea Otter back then was like the season opener for World Cup racing, even though it wasn't designated as a World Cup. So back then, we had a World Cup race in Napa, California, and then the next weekend was Sea Otter. Or maybe the previous year, there was a World Cup race in Mazatlan, Mexico. So all the European riders were already on this side of the world, and then they'd cruise up and do Sea Otter. So 2000, maybe 1999, it might have even been my first ever pro mountain bike race. And this was when mountain bike racing, had 150 guys strong, and I was starting 150th on the line and, being lucky to finish 90th. And then 2000, I trained harder, worked harder, gained confidence, and maybe made it up to 40th. So 2001, I was fully committed to like, Sea Otter's my race. The course suits me. Back then it was 2 long laps. So it was definitely a longer event. And on that day, I just remember, being super confident in my training, super confident in my fitness, and having a great start. I was on the Laguna Seca track with some of the best riders in the world. And as I settled into the race, I found myself in that top 20, 25, which again at the time was behind some of the best World Cup racers in the country. Philippe Merhaga, Christophe Dupuy, Cadel Evans, Ryder Hesjall. These guys had some pretty impressive results. So on the second lap up the final climb, I found myself in a group of maybe 5 or 6 guys, one of them being Travis Brown. And I realized this was the battle for the top American on that day. I was feeling great on that final climb. And I remember going to the front, and Travis Brown actually told me to slow down. He's like, "Hey, Brian, slow down. We still got a long ways to go." And I was like, "Oh man, this is Travis Brown. Like, he's one of the best US riders ever. I'm definitely going to listen to him." So I slowed down. And then, of course, Travis beat me in the sprint on the track at the end of the race. And I was like, oh, man, like that was the oldest trick in the book. I was probably about to drop him. He told me to slow down. I totally listened to him, and then he beat me. But anyway, I finished 17th. So I was the second American behind Travis. If you look at the list of guys who was in front of me that day, probably 10 out of the 16 who were ahead of me are known dopers. Like, that was back in the day of when all the pro mountain bikers were on the juice. So if I look at that result, one, I think it was really good for a young kid from Pinckney, Michigan to be the second American at a huge race like that behind a bunch of European and Canadian dopers. And then the learning lesson, from racing with Travis and him pulling the old man trick on me when I was a 20-year-old kid, was something that I remembered in racing for a long time, and probably, used at an Iceman or an Otter or Shawamagon here and there later on in my career. So just one of those races. I worked really hard for it. It was early in my career, and I kind of prove to myself that, hey, I can be one of the best mountain bike racers in America.
Yeah, I can see why that one is near and dear to your heart for sure. The competition there. Yeah. Can we go to 2014 and have you talk about the Grand Junction off-road and tell us a little bit about that, the crit and the race the next day, or how did that work?
Yeah, so that kind of makes me think about just mountain biking in the US in general. So back in that 2001 Sea Otter timeframe, mountain biking was huge in the United States. We had the NORBA, National Off-Road Bicycle Association race series. NORBA was huge. Mountain biking was huge. Around 2004, NORBA kind of went away. Mountain biking kind of died in the US, and Lance Armstrong and his Tour de France kind of took over. So, shortly before that 2014 timeframe, Epic Rides, which is a race promoter, came along and kind of brought some life back into mountain biking in the US by hosting these races that were like a weekend festival of mountain biking. So they had a fat tire crit on a Friday. They had party and amateur racing with bands and music on Saturdays. And then they had like a 50-mile epic backcountry race on a Sunday. So it brought life back into mountain biking in the United States. They had some serious prize money. And in 2014, they launched their event in Grand Junction, Colorado. So I was all in and supporting Epic Rides in these events to kind of bring some life back into the mountain bike scene in the US. Grand Junction Off-Road is without a doubt the most technical mountain bike race course in the United States. So I showed up to that weekend kind of coming from the Midwest at the time. I'd spent the summer in Wisconsin and ended up in Grand Junction. And man, the mountain biking was so technical. Like there would be a spot in the trail where you would be riding along and you'd just see this like cliff, and you didn't know if the line was to the right or to the left. And if you went right when the line was to the left, there would be a 10-foot drop off. But if you go left onto the proper line, you'd have a 3-foot drop, a 3-foot drop, a 3-foot drop, and you'd make it down this ledgy section of trail. So super technical. You had to be really dialed with your skills. So in general, it was a race to me that, proved myself as a good technical mountain bike racer in a long, hard event. So super proud of that result, especially after, spending some time in the Midwest and around that time frame. I was also pretty focused on cyclocross. So being able to compete in a super technical mountain bike race was one of those things that, yeah, just made me feel good about my career and about being kind of an overall cyclist where I could be good at a technical race or good at a tactical race or good at a cyclocross race. And then winning one of those fat tire crits in those epic rides, events with the vibe that they had going in their downtown atmospheres was something special as well.
Did you know going there that it was going to be that technical?
I had heard rumors, but I had no idea it was going to be that technical for that long. I mean, there's this descent in the course called the butter knife, and somebody said, "Hey, butter knife, super technical," But I'd been spending time in Tucson in the winters, and I rode a lot on Mount Lemmon, on the Bug Springs Trail, on Milagrosa Trail, and I felt confident in my skills after spending that time in Tucson. But I didn't know that Grand Junction was going to be on par with Milagrosa, and or then in a racing scenario, we were going to be doing something that gnarly.
Interesting. Yeah. So if you're trying to get ready for something like that and you're in Michigan, does Marquette allow for anything kind of similar, or is there just nothing that's going to touch it?
Yeah, so I think Marquette does, like the North Trails. I don't know exactly what the names of those trails are up there. McLovin, up in that area in Marquette. I don't know how familiar you are with Marquette, but there's definitely some ledgy technical riding up in Marquette. But the big difference is it just doesn't happen for as long. Like in Marquette, the downhill is, 2 minutes of technical ledgy stuff. In Grand Junction, it's 45 minutes to an hour of descending on nonstop technical stuff. So it would be very challenging to be prepared for a race like that coming from Michigan.
Wow. That sounds really tough.
It's
That just put a
really
better
tough.
yeah. Yeah, you just put a better perspective of that technical race for me. 2 minutes, 45 minutes. That's huge.
Yeah. Yeah.
You got to have some strong upper body for that then too.
Yeah, you just got to be super confident in your skills, and you got to be relaxed when you're riding on stuff like that. I remember towards the end of the race, there was a trail called Andes. They haven't used it the last couple of years, but there was this step up, 10-minute climb, 3.5 hours into the race. And there's this step up section where you got to make this super physical move. And if you make a small mistake, there's like a 50-foot cliff off to the left. And I remember going up that, like thinking I'm on the verge of cramping, right? I'm in this battle with Ben Sontag, for Fernando, Barry Wicks. Like we were all battling. And I'm thinking, man, if I cramp and like do one of those silly tip overs because I'm cramped, like I'm going to die on this race course. Like there's never another course in the United States where I felt like if I made a technical mistake, I could like fall to my death. And I actually remember thinking, again, I was kind of in the cyclocross mode. So I was like, safety first. I'm just going to do a little cyclocross action up this thing, take 3 steps, hop back on my bike, hope I don't cramp when I'm remounting on my bike, and then finish this race safe and alive.
You answered my question. I hope you got off your bike.
Yeah. There's another section in that course. Maybe midway through, there's a big descent. I think it's called Bangs Canyon, and then you take a left at the bottom of this canyon, and there's probably a 10-minute slick rock climb, almost like a Moab style. And there's a bunch of ledges there, and these ledges took like these physical moves to make it up. And again, I was in the cyclocross mode, and I just decided, it might be more efficient to hop off and walk up these things. And I remember walking, and I was with somebody, and they kind of gave me a hard time, like, how come you're walking? How come you can't make it? And I'm like, you're huffing and puffing, and I'm just over here having a casual walk. So I'll use my technique. You can use your technique, and we'll battle it out in the final sprint on the pavement back into town.
Right? Oh, I've done that a few times in races where there's been something and I look at it and I think, okay, if I don't make it up this and the guy in front of me does, he's going to separate and I'm going to have to put in a huge effort to get back. So I've done it a few times where I just, like you, because I've raced some cyclocross, so I've got good at getting off the bike and running and getting right back on it. So I've done that a couple of times and been able to think back and like, I think that was a smart decision and for me in those particular races. So yeah, I do think there's a time for getting off the bike. And I think
Yep,
cyclocross
definitely.
taught me that.
Yeah. And I think, as a racer, I've done road racing, I've done cyclocross, I've done mountain biking, and at different times in each event, I think the three complement each other. You can use tactics or techniques from mountain biking in a road race, or use the road technique during a cross race, cross technique during a mountain bike race. So, I always like to tell some of the younger riders out there, get in as much variety as possible, race different disciplines, and learn about just being a good racer in general. If you're 14 years old, you don't need to specify one event as your main event. So, yeah, I think, having those little tricks in your pocket are definitely helpful.
Yeah, I'm going to agree. I'm going to shift gears a little bit.
Sure.
And you've had some minor setbacks along the way, one being the Lyme disease. And I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about what happened, how it set you back, and how you came back just as strong as ever after that.
Man, that was a not fun time frame for sure. I remember, honestly, I don't even remember what year it was, or exactly when it was, but I do remember I was in the Midwest, probably having a picnic in the backyard. I'd probably just done a super hard training ride. And I just remember like laying in the grass, watching the clouds pass by, doing a family picnic. Later that night, I started feeling sick, like I had the flu. The next day, we were flying back to Arizona. So maybe this was around 2016, 2017. I remember flying back to Prescott and being super sick that next day on the airplane. Like one of those times where you're just in misery thinking, I've got to get off this airplane. This is the worst flight ever, super sick. And probably thought I was going to vomit. So walked back into the airplane bathroom. And for some reason, like I picked up my shirt and looked at my chest, and I saw that huge bullseye rash. And I was like, oh man, that does not look good. Like, and it was just one of those things, like everything clicked me. I was like, that is definitely a tick bite. That is that bullseye rash. And I am done for. So I made it back to Prescott. I remember just being on the couch, like completely dead after that flight. And my wife was telling me, like, we got to go to the doctor. We got to go to the doctor. And I was thinking, I can't. I am so dead that I don't even have the energy to make it to the doctor. So I went to the doctor here in Prescott, and we don't have Lyme disease here. We don't have wood ticks or deer ticks. And the doctor here was very unfamiliar with Lyme disease. Luckily, my wife is a nurse, so she was kind of there and said, "Hey, he needs doxycycline. Like, that's the antibiotic we need for Lyme disease." And, it's this weird situation where the patient and the patient's wife is telling the doctor what to do. And most doctors don't really like that. But luckily, I got a dose of doxy. It lasted a little longer than maybe it should have for catching it so soon. Ended up getting a second dose of doxy like a month later. And, eventually it went away. But for like a month, I was on the couch, laid out, zero energy. I could not do anything. And I actually remember my first race back was Iceman. And again, I don't remember 2016, 2017, somewhere around that time frame. But that was one of my hardest Icemans. Like I was pretty much just doing it to keep my streak alive and keep, aiming towards that 25 years of Iceman. I probably shouldn't have done it, but I was like, man, it's Iceman. I got to do it. And I remember in that race, I got dropped from the lead group at least 20 times. I think I was with Alexi, but we kept clawing our way back. And, maybe Alexi and I ended up 10th and 11th that year. So, mission accomplished that. And maybe that was my 23rd or 24th Iceman at the time, but mission accomplished. But man, that Lyme disease took me down a few notches. But after that, Iceman probably took a good off season, and luckily, I think we caught it early enough, and I presented that bullseye rash, and slowly, 2017, slowly just made my way back towards good training and was smart that off season, and eventually made the full recovery.
Yeah, nice. I like to bring stories like that up just for the youth, if they're listening, or up and coming people. Like, if you run into a challenge, don't quit. You got to claw your way back. You got to claw your way back.
Yeah, definitely. You got to be smart about it, right? You got to listen to your body. You got to take that time off. You got to use your resources, go see your doctors. And there's going to be setbacks. I've had a couple other setbacks as well. But yeah, if you're just patient, there's always another bike race. There's always another season. You can keep doing this sport as long as you want at any particular level. But you gotta be smart, and you gotta treat your body with respect.
Agreed. Can we go back to the beginning? Where did you grow up? I know you said Michigan. What school system did you go through?
Yeah, I grew up in southeast Michigan in a small town called Pinckney. So Pinckney is the home of the Potawatomi Trail, just an old school 18-mile single track loop. And I was probably in a neighborhood 2 or 3 miles from kind of the furthest north section of that trail. So it was pretty easy for me as a kid to access that trail. Back in 93, my dad took me for my first ride out there. We both had this horrible crash on probably the easiest downhill. Dad's going down, he's getting wobbly. I'm going down, hands off, feet off, and we both crash in this huge mud puddle. And then this snapper turtle, like this giant snapper turtle, kind of comes up, looks at us, kind of like, "What are you guys doing?" And then like sinks back down. And it was like that moment, that Dad and I were like, "Oh, this sport's pretty awesome." That was awesome. We both just crashed, and, that snapper turtle was going to get us, but it didn't. We can survive. We can keep going. So yeah, Pinckney, Michigan, actually the same hometown as Alexi, and just had a solid group of friends who were into mountain biking in that mid-90s timeframe. Skylar Reeves being one of them. And, we got into this groove where every day after school, we'd want to go ride the Potawatomi Trail. And, the two of us grew up together, riding mountain bikes, having fun, using it as kind of an escape from our parents to get over to Silver Lake there in Pinckney, Michigan. And, hit up the concession stand at the beach and get popcorn and french fries and, cotton candy and that kind of stuff. So as kids, it was just an awesome escape and an awesome, way to get out there and kind of explore some of your freedoms as a teenager.
Absolutely. Yeah. I know I didn't do the mountain biking, but we had bikes and we would always go up to get away from the house. We'd go up to the party store, it was like 4 or 5 miles away, and candy and
Yeah,
snacks.
yeah. That was
Exactly.
definitely what we were doing for sure. So, yeah, and Pinckney is it's a good small farm town. We met this other couple there at the time. They were a little bit older than us, but Jeff and Ann Bierman, they were psyched on mountain biking, and they, a couple months later brought us to our first ever mountain bike race at the Garland. It was the Garland Hammer. It was my first ever mountain bike race in 1993 up north in Michigan. A couple weeks later, I did Addison Oaks, and then 1993 was my first ever Iceman, kind of at the end of that season. So, yeah, just riding trails in Pinckney, Michigan. Met some friends. They brought us to the races that first year, and then from then on, it was like we had to do every single possible mountain bike race we could do the rest of our lives.
That's awesome. I don't think kids know what riding their bike up to the store means today. And
Probably because the candy's not 5 cents anymore.
right, right. I think they even had a penny jar, right?
Yeah, well, you could collect the pop cans. You get 10 cents and you get two pieces of candy. It was a great deal.
Absolutely. Growing up, did you play any other sports or did you do anything else besides bikes?
Yeah, so, I did a little bit of soccer, a little bit of like youth basketball, but the main sport that I did was wrestling.
Oh,
So my dad was huge into wrestling. So he started a youth wrestling team in Pinckney. So I started wrestling probably around age 5 or 6 and wrestled through my senior year of high school.
nice. Do you feel that helped you on the bike at all, that sport?
Definitely. So wrestling is without a doubt one of the hardest sports. The work ethic of wrestlers is super intense. The training is super intense. And then the sport itself, is you versus one other person in the middle of the wrestling mat, in the middle of the gymnasium with all the people just watching you. So there's no team to hide behind. It's you and the hard work that you put in against the other guy and the hard work he's put in. And yeah, you gotta learn how to lose with respect, and then you got to learn how to win with respect. And you definitely learn that the hard work you put in equals the good results. So I think that work ethic that I learned from being a wrestler definitely transferred to a hard work ethic when training for mountain bike races.
I agree 100%. That makes a lot of sense. And you can see it. I mean, I can see it when I look at wrestling when they're practicing, just the level of intensity that goes on in practice. It definitely would transfer over into the cycling world for sure. If you weren't good on the bike, what would you be doing?
Whew, that is a tough question. So yeah, if I wasn't a mountain bike racer, hadn't been racing professionally for the last 20 or 25 years, I think part of the reason I love mountain biking is the traveling, the different places that I've been, the different people that I've met. So I feel like I was a kind of person who didn't follow the norms of society. I didn't go to college right away. I didn't get married right away. I didn't have a family right away. So I think if I wasn't a mountain bike racer, I would probably still have that same life philosophy, maybe not follow the norms. So I think I'd be traveling a lot. I think I'd be working a low key job, Blockbuster Video or Taco Bell or something like that without a ton of responsibility so that I could really try to enjoy life, enjoy nature, enjoy traveling, just get different experiences, maybe in life, not necessarily via the bicycle.
And even in today's world, you could probably find something halfway decent that's remote to allow you to do
Yeah.
that too.
Yeah, definitely. And, that's kind of what I'm doing now in my coaching business. The coaching allows me to work remotely. Luckily for me, it allows me to share my passion with other young up and coming athletes. But yeah, without the bike, I think I'd live a similar lifestyle of traveling and having fun and trying to keep it low key, just not on the bike, not on two wheels.
Yeah. You just touched on coaching. So I'm going to go that direction. And not everybody puts as much time back into the youth as you do. It seems like you do quite a bit in developing the skills with the up and coming kids in the mountain biking realm. Maybe tell us a little bit about a program that you're involved with. I think you do something up in Marquette and maybe like a junior mountain bike team or something.
It's kind of a funny story, probably around 2010, 2011, 2012. So I would say right in the middle of my career, like when I'm really trying to establish myself, really trying to make a living doing this, probably at some of my peak fitness. I got a phone call from somebody actually up in Houghton, Michigan, at Michigan Tech University, asking me if I would be willing to host a junior mountain bike camp for the college. And I thought to myself, there's no way. Like, I'm in the middle of training, I'm in the middle of racing. I can't not train for 7 days to go ride mountain bikes, with some kids. Like, it's just not what you do as a pro bike racer. But I thought about it and maybe talked with my wife, and a couple people twisted my arm, and I said, okay, yes, I'm gonna do it. And I went up there to Houghton, Michigan. So it was probably one of my first times riding other trails in the UP besides Ore to Shore. It was my first time up to Copper Harbor. And I was riding with these kids, and I just realized how much fun they were having. And it probably reminded me of 1993 in Pinckney, Michigan, and how much fun I was having with my buddy Skylar. So I left that weekend, that first junior mountain bike camp, again around 2010, thinking, man, that might have been the best weekend or the best week of my entire season. I didn't race. I got paid a little bit of money to do this. I made friends with these young kids. It was just an awesome weekend. I got to ride a bunch of new trails. So that junior mountain bike camp has now been going since 2010. So I think this year is going to be around year 13. And the kind of the feedback that I've received, the good feelings that I've received from doing this camp year after year after year has just been amazing. I've seen a couple kids go on to start their professional mountain bike careers, like Caleb Swartz and Daxton Mock. I mean, those kids came through my camp and are now crushing it at the professional level. But then I've seen lots of other kids go on to be like generals in the military or moms or nurses or scientists. Like the amount of success in all different aspects of life that I've seen these kids achieve after going to this camp has been, I guess, super fulfilling for me. So using mountain biking as kind of a tool to create these friendships that are lasting super long times, watching some of these kids be lifelong cyclists, whether at the high level or just casually, or a couple of the kids now from those first camps now have kids of their own, and those kids are mountain biking. So it's just been a super great thing up in Houghton in the UP at that Michigan Tech junior mountain bike camp. And it kind of created my passion for helping other kids. Now that I'm in Arizona, I'm working on a daily basis with the Arizona Devo team. So another super solid group of kids who, we're racing every weekend in Arizona, traveling to world championships and UCI races, junior series races. So just it kind of started with like, man, I don't really want to do this, but it ended up being, a huge passion of mine.
I can attest to working with kids is fun. I've worked with the Coyotes here for a few years now, and it's just something about it.
Definitely. Yeah, it's cool. And a lot of these kids, whatever, 15 years later, 10 years later, are we're still friends. We still communicate, every month. And yeah, just to be a part of their lives and be a positive influence in their lives. And yeah, it's just really fulfilling.
I agree. Thinking about your whole career, you've raced different bikes and you've had a lot of different bikes. Is there one bike in particular that would be your favorite throughout your whole career? It could be a road bike, a gravel bike, mountain bike, cyclocross bike.
Easy. Trek 26-inch top fuel.
Nice.
Like
That was easy.
super easy question for me. That earlier in the conversation we talked about the 26-inch and when I jumped to the 29er. So that 26-inch top fuel is the one where I made the phone call to Trek and be like, guys, could you send me every single last one of these frames? I don't think I can figure out how to race another bike as fast as this 26-inch top fuel. So that bike had a super high bottom bracket. I was doing a lot of racing in the Midwest then, and I just figured out how to make that bike go fast. I figured out how to pedal it around every single corner or over any single technical obstacle that any trail could present to me. It was just like I was one with that bike, and the model stayed very similar for maybe 4 years or so. So I had a lot of time and a lot of racing on that bike. It would be awesome to be able to ride that bike again now to see, after so many years of being on a 29er, like if I got back on that top fuel, how I would think about it now. But, it's one of those things like when I was a kid, the 26-inch top fuel was the best bike ever.
Man, that would be something if Iceman would say 26 inches only in the pro race.
I think Kabush would be happy, maybe.
Yeah. Another guy that's been in it for a long time like you. I think
Exactly. He's definitely done his fair share of racing on the 26-inch wheel.
you guys are probably the oldest guys left in the pro circuit, aren't you? Just riding around still?
I
Because I
think
think
so.
Todd Wells retired.
Yeah, Todd's done a couple races since then, but definitely not racing on a super regular basis. Carl Decker was kind of one of the last holdouts as well for the old guys. Jeremiah Bishop still doing a little bit of gravel racing. So there's a couple of us still out there and having fun with it. But I think that's mostly just it. I think, those guys that I just named, we all love the sport. We've all been doing it for a really long time. And, we're probably not doing it to make $1 million. We're just doing it because we love it.
Yeah. So speaking of the age related thing, I've got a question because I was highly impressed at the Whiskey 50 last year in the crit that you were able to get fourth still. Because usually when you think about athletes, you think about, so a crit is fast, it's high intensity. You have to have a lot of power in that race. And usually when you think of an athlete like that, you think of someone in their 20s, right? You're not in your 20s, you're in your 40s. So how in the heck do you get fourth in the crit at a big event like that? I mean, what did you do to be able to do that?
And the whiskey crit, even more so than a regular crit, in my opinion, it's fitness oriented. I mean, there's a climb after corner one in that crit that is got to be 20+%. That's where all the spectators hang out and they're drinking beer and cheering, and it's raucous, it's loud on that climb. But one, it's a hometown race. So anytime that I've got a hometown race, so I live here in Prescott in the winters, I'm a little extra motivated. Two, I'm familiar with all the other trails here. So for the backcountry race, I'm comfortable enough to be on my hardtail. So with epic rides, you have to use the same bike in the fat tire crit as you use in the backcountry race. So I think being on my hardtail gives me a little bit of an advantage in the crit. And then, like I touched on earlier, the multi-discipline, the amount of road racing that I've done, the amount of cyclocross racing that I've done, the amount of different style of mountain bike racing that I've done, short tracks, time trials, cross countries, marathons. I think all that experience obviously plays a role. I don't think I'm as fit anymore as some of those guys I was racing with last year in that fat tire crit, but my experience, my knowledge of my own body and not going over my limit and just trying to be as efficient as possible and saving it for that last lap was kind of the key to being able to land on that podium again.
It's funny you say save it for the last lap, because when I talk to most people that have done that, they talk about bleeding out of their eyes and the dryness and that hill you talk about every lap. It's brutal. And I don't know how you're saving anything for the last lap, but
Yeah, so I mean, corner number one is a super tight right hand corner. So you need to be able to figure out how to carry a ton of speed through that corner. So because that corner is so tight, a lot of people end up breaking in that corner. So when I'm rolling through the start finish line, approaching that first corner, I'm actually allowing a small gap to open up in front of me so that I can carry my speed through the corner. Whereas a lot of other people are going into that corner, hitting the brakes, and then having to do this major acceleration up that climb. So if you start that climb with doing a major acceleration and then you get to the steep part, man, you're going into the red zone quick. If you can carry some momentum around that corner, roll back to the back of the group, not accelerate, and then hit the steep part of the climb, you're doing better. If you do what Kabush and I do, which is called sagging the climb, Kabush and I somehow in our old age figured out how to sag a climb. So we try to use as little energy up that climb as possible. So, for example, we will start at the bottom of that climb in 10th position, 10th wheel, up the steepest part of the climb where everybody else is pedaling as hard as possible. Kabush and I drift back from 10th to 11th, 12th, 13th, 14th, and we might let 10 guys pass us. So we don't go into the red zone up the steepest part of that climb. We actually maybe keep it at tempo or sub LT where everybody else is sprinting max effort to get up that climb. So that is how I'm trying to save energy. So if everybody else is, we'll say that crit is 15 laps. If everybody else is doing a 2-minute VO2 effort up that climb every single lap, yeah, they're going to be bleeding out of their eyeballs. And that dry air is going to have your mouth, almost like back in the wrestling days, like cotton mouth. We had that in wrestling, and you had this little lemon juice you'd spray in your mouth at a wrestling tournament. But Kabush and I are trying to sag it, stay within our limits, not go into that VO2 so that when it comes time to it, that last lap, you got a little bit of gas left in the tank.
that makes sense. And also so I'm putting it together now. With your skills on the bike, you're able to go. So for people who don't know, after that big climb, there's a fast downhill section with tight corners. So with your skills, you're probably able to carry your speed around corner number 3 and then corner number 4 as well, right? Whereas other people may be braking because they don't have those skills. So you're, again, putting yourself back into position of, top 10 again, just around
Definitely.
those. Yeah. Okay. That
Yep.
makes
So
sense.
efficiency the entire way around that circuit, not going over your limit. having the confidence to be able to drop 10th wheel to 20th wheel. Like a lot of people don't have that confidence. Like, oh man, if I go back to 20th, I'm in trouble. So the ability to read a race, like all these things they're maybe easy to describe, and maybe a lot of people will be able to understand that concept, but then to be able to actually do it live, like while it's happening, while your heart rate's maxed and you can't breathe, it just takes a lot of experience to do that. So that kind of reminds me of just maybe 2003. I did a little stint with the Saturn development team on the road, and I raced Super Week that year. Super Week was this big series of crit racing or crit races in Wisconsin. So that 2003, I probably did 17 to 20 days in a row of crit racing. And I raced with some of the best European crit racers in the world at the time, and just racing with those guys day after day after day, I learned how to be efficient in a crit race. And that transferred over to short track racing, again, transferred over to these fat tire crits. I did a lot of racing with Steve Tilford, who was kind of the pioneer of like being able to be good in a fat tire crit when Cactus Cup first did those fat tire crits back in the day, and like Galena, Illinois, and Brazil and Japan, and downtown Fountain Hills in Arizona, the original Cactus Cup. So just, being in it for a long time, learning from the best, doing a bunch of different races, it all adds up to being able to do well as an old man in a race like the Whiskey 50 fat tire crit.
That makes sense. And I like that technique there, the uphill sag. Might have to try that out. So for that race, for me, and I think I told you at the start, we started and we made that. I actually left a little gap because I've learned that even in mountain bike racing, when we're going downhill, I like to leave a little gap when we start going downhill, because usually what happens is I can carry a lot of momentum into the next hill and I'll catch up to the group or whoever's in front of me fairly easily with the momentum up the next climb. So I left a little gap, but what happened for me is there was a crash right around the first corner just before the climb, and I had to slam on my brakes and almost completely stop. So I tried one time to catch back up, and I went way into the red zone up that first hill, and then that's when I realized that my race was done.
That sounds like you had to start the race twice, which is definitely never a good thing in a short crit like that.
No, not when you're the slowest guy either. What years did you win Iceman?
Iceman, let's see. I think so. 2004 was the Triple Crown. Then I won again in 2007. 2007, I think, was a race where I attacked way out, like right before the Vasa Trail started. So, man, I did a long solo effort at that one. 2010, I won. That was kind of another big one that earlier we talked about, Sea Otter, when I kind of established myself as one of the better racers in the country. But then like 2010, by the time that came around, there was like this new generation of racers. And I felt like I had to earn my respect again as one of the best racers in the country. So 2010, I remember doing Iceman, and I think at the time there was this YouTube series or something called Behind the Barriers, or not, maybe that was Jeremy Powers' thing, but it was Colt McElwain, and he was doing a bunch of YouTube videos, and he did one called the Iceman Experience, and I ended up winning that race. And at the beginning, he interviewed me, and I said, "Yeah, you got to attack to win," and I did it. And I remember he interviewed me afterwards. He's like, "Man, you called your shot. That was crazy." And afterwards, he's panning around with the camera, and he's like, "Man, how'd that feel? Because that guy's a national champion. That guy's a national champion. That guy's a national champion." And it was, it was Bush and it was Jeremiah Bishop and Todd Wells and Sam Schultz. And, it was just one of those years where I was like, man, I beat a lot of guys. And I think 2010 was one of the first years at Iceman where multiple fast guys showed up to race. Iceman's always been a race where, you'd get one or two fast guys showing up. Like way back in the day, Tinker Juarez would show up. Tilford would show up. Ryder Hesjall showed up once. The Trek team brought Lucas Flukinger and Matthias Flukinger once, but it was always, one fast guy. 2010, kind of things started changing. Maybe people caught on to how much prize money there actually was. Maybe back then that was during the days of blogs. Maybe I shouldn't have wrote in my blog so much about how much prize money there was in the Midwest, but it kind of blew up at the professional level around that time. So being able to win one of those races that I was truly passionate about was pretty awesome against all those guys. And then I think my last Iceman victory was 2014. And that you had said that was the one you did. Super muddy year. And I believe I was off the front with Kabush and two of his teammates. I think it was Derek Zanstra and Cameron Jett. So it was like me versus three Canadian teammates. And somehow I pulled off that victory in kind of a duel with Kabush at the end. And again, after that race, I think Kabush was pretty upset that three teammates couldn't beat me. But he came up to me. He's like, "Man, you're one of the smartest racers I've ever raced against." And I was like, "Oh, that's yeah." I felt like, man, that was a moment that I remember that I was like, man, that was good. Kabush, I think I earned some respect there. So that was 2014, the last victory at Iceman.
And do you think because 2014 was nasty, do you think your cyclocross skills helped you out with that race?
Without a doubt, yeah. And I think 2010 was also another muddy Iceman year. So yeah, I think the trend at Iceman is it's faster. Roadies are showing up. The Bissell team from Michigan is showing up. When it gets muddier, it definitely separates the group a little bit. So obviously helps the guys who are more true mountain bikers and cyclocrossers are comfortable in that mud where maybe some of the gravel guys and road guys aren't quite as comfortable sliding around all the time.
Yeah, that definitely makes sense. At this point in your life, because, are you 45?
I will be soon.
Okay, 44 still.
Yeah, yeah. So there's that 44. You're still young, right? 45. It sounds like you're super old once you get to 45. So I think I got 3 or 4 good months left in me.
Nice. I think it's because 45 is halfway to 90, right?
Something like that. I don't like to do much math, especially that kind of math.
Yeah, I think I'll stop that kind of math. Anyway, at this point, at this point in your life, would you still rather race your bike, chase a good KOM, or go on an adventure ride with friends? And is there any particular reason why?
At this point, I would definitely still prefer racing my bike. There's just something about it. There's something about the competition. There's something about the feeling afterwards. Yeah, I think racing for me right now would still be number one in that list. However, early season, it is those adventure rides that kind of keep your motivation going. That's what allows you to train to get to that level to race your bike. And then chasing a Strava KOM, like that's motivation. That's this new motivation that maybe we didn't have in the mid 90s or early 2000s. So again, I kind of use that Strava KOM tool as training motivation and as a way to prepare for those races.
I like that. And I'm not I kind of do the same thing because I like to stay healthy. So I got to have something to do to keep me active. And the KOMs, like you said, they help me, I guess, train for racing. You got something to shoot for. But the group rides with friends and the adventure rides, you go out and you do, hey, you want to ride from here to here, a 7 hour, 8 hour ride? Sure, let's go do that on the weekend, right? It's good training and you're with friends and it just makes it fun. So I think for me too, that I do like the KOMs and I do like having racing in the schedule because it just gives me something to shoot for.
Yeah, I've been doing it long enough that I don't know that I could just do one of those things. I think all three of those complement each other. And for
Yeah.
example, last year with the Strava thing, I was in this epic Strava competition with myself. So I had a KOM in Sheboygan on one of the longest climbs that we have. It's not significantly long. It's not a significant climb. It's probably 1 minute flat, 1 minute, a minute and a half of rolling hill, and then another minute of flat. So we call it like a 4 minute climb. So I got this Strava KOM in 2012. So last year, 2022, Brian Motter at age 43 or 44 was in competition with Brian Motter, who was 33 years old. So it was this cool, I'm not really trying to get Strava KOMs or anything, but it was this cool thing that motivated me for whatever reason. Let's see if I can compete with myself 10 years younger. So by
Yeah.
the end of the season, with a little bit of technology help, I got a new Trek Emonda road bike. I went and smashed that KOM time by like 4 or 5 seconds. So 44-year-old me beat 33-year-old me by the end of a few efforts up that Silver Spring KOM.
That's awesome. The old guy crushes the younger version of himself.
Exactly.
Oh man. I also think it's a sport we can do for, quite a bit. I mean, I'm 45 and I don't plan on stopping anytime soon. I mean, I think we could ride this till we're 60, right?
I hope so. So one of my, again, I don't know why things motivate me when they motivate me, but a couple years ago, I got it in my head that I want to get one of those 25-year Iceman jerseys. Like I've been doing Iceman since 1993. I think Iceman started in 1990. There's a group of 5 or 6 guys that have done every single Iceman. And I just happened to come into Iceman, at 15 years old in 1993. So I missed those first few. But I said to myself, hey, man, I want one of those jerseys. I want to compete in Iceman for a solid 25 years. And I think it was 2018 that I got my Iceman jersey of 25 years. Steve Brown presented it to me after the race. It was a pretty special moment for Steve and I. And it helps that I've been on that Iceman podium so many times. So for me, it's a special race. But as soon as I got that 25-year-old jersey, I thought to myself, okay, I want to be the first dude ever who does 50 Icemans. Like that, I want to double it. Let's see if we can keep this thing going a little bit longer.
Nice. 50's the goal then, huh?
50 might be the new Iceman goal.
All right. That'd be crazy. 50's the goal. When you got started on the bike, was it your dad that influenced you or did you have any other influence?
So I think it was that time that I got to spend with my dad. It was those road trips, those drives up to Crystal Mountain, Michigan or Boyne, Michigan in the fall, checking out the fall colors. It was the time that we got to go ride the Pato together. Yeah, there's just a lot of time spent with my dad and really good quality time. So that was definitely huge. There was a lot of influence from the Beermans who were psyched about racing and brought me to those first couple of races. it was, yeah, the camaraderie with Skylar Reeves. And as we were 16, 17 years old, hopping in the Dodge Caravan for the first time, driving to a Norba National race in Mount Snow, Vermont, and the first time taking off for an entire summer, heading out to Big Bear, California, and Mammoth, California, and Park City, Utah to do those Norba races on the West Coast. It's just kind of like spawned from like, yeah, just this adventure and dream as a kid to like reality. So I don't really feel like I had like, there was never like a John Tomac in Michigan who was like a super idol that I looked up to. But it was just this, again, time with dad, time with friends, high quality time in life at an early age that I think kind of created my passion for it.
Speaking of kids, and I was thinking like of the Wars Cup. If you've got decent racers in the Midwest and you've got a kid that wants to excel, do you think that the Wars is maybe the best option over here to get them involved in? Because I don't know, I just look thinking of the races in Michigan. We don't really have anything super technical to get them ready. Personally, I don't think. And I've heard that the Wars has some good courses that have some nice technical features that can, I don't know, get them a little more ready for what's coming.
Yeah, so for me, I think it's the variety. I think allowing a young kid to experience as much variety as possible. So, when I was young, I started in Michigan. That fun promotion series that Brent Walk did was amazing. We were racing each other every weekend. There was a great group of juniors. We were all friends, but we were all competitors on the bike. And that, I guess, yielded itself to a trip out to Arizona to do the first Cactus Cup, and all of a sudden it was a completely different type of dirt. It wasn't super technical, but the dirt was different. So now I was all of a sudden familiar with the dirt in Michigan and the dirt in Arizona. And then that, led to a race in Park City, Utah, where all of a sudden it was decomposed granite dirt, so also slippery like Arizona, but technical. So just slowly over time, I experienced more and more different types of terrain, different types of dirt. And it wasn't necessarily like this extreme drop off that I ever learned to do. It was just slowly over time, different things. I remember 1995, I did the Norba finals in Helen, Georgia. Again, like not a technical course, but it was super muddy that year. And it was like this red clay mud that, everybody just experienced the red clay mud that instantly makes your bike 50 pounds. But that was my first time experiencing that type of mud. Didn't know what to do. The weekend before, I got second as a junior up in Traverse City with the infamous water jump. Like that was another kind of breakout race for me. 1995 junior second place, Traverse City, Michigan at my home Norba race. The next weekend, I thought I was going to go to a Norba finals and make the world championship team in Helen, Georgia. And I probably rode 10 feet onto that muddy clay and absolutely didn't know what to do with myself. But that experience of getting to know how to race in the mud turned into cyclocross race, turned into success racing in the mud in Iceman. So I think just the variety. So if you have a young kid in Michigan, I would get him up to the UP because it's completely different than, the metro areas. I would get him over to Wisconsin. I would get him down to Brown County, Indiana. I would send him up to Sault Ste. Marie in Canada on the other side of the border. There's a whole different style of riding up there. So just as much variety as possible, obviously without forcing it on a young kid.
And maybe if they do like and they want to get better, they can do some of the gravel races too to help with that, more that diesel engines.
Yeah, definitely. And then, they do some gravel racing and they get comfortable on skinnier tires. And like you said, the gravel racing last year was cold and muddy. but maybe this year it's going to be warm and full speed ahead. So last year it might have been a little more skill oriented. This year it might be a little more tactics and fitness oriented. So again, that variety for a young kid and keeping them having fun. I think the UP of Michigan is probably one of the best spots you can get to. There's so much variety up there. There's so much trails being built up there by, like, I think it's NTN up in Marquette and Copper Harbor Trails Club up there. Those guys are really starting to kind of have more and more variety in their trails. And I think for the Midwest, that's probably where you're going to get the most bang for your buck in improving your skills and kind of eye opening. If you're from Southeast Wisconsin or the metro area in Michigan, all our trails are very similar. But if you get up to the UP, all of a sudden you're doing a descent in Marquette and you're like, holy moly, along with an amazing view of Lake Superior.
Yeah, I agree 100%. And I, for some reason, had never been to Marquette in the summer until this past summer. And so it was my first time riding those trails, and amazing. Totally different ball game up there. And I agree with you. If you've got someone that's up and coming, they need to go up there and do a little more riding. I still have to get to Copper Harbor. I've been told I need to get there. It's tough to go to Copper Harbor for me because it's such a long drive when I can just go to Marquette now, or I can just go to Brown County. I can even go to Tennessee, right?
Yeah. Yeah. So, yeah, that's interesting. What I guess I kind of got lucky when I landed in Sheboygan, Wisconsin, because Marquette and Copper Harbor, Michigan are actually closer living in Wisconsin than they were when I lived in Pinckney. Like, we just go straight up, cross the border in Menominee, Marinette, go through Escanaba, and all of a sudden you're at this paradise of mountain biking in the UP of Michigan with that variety of trails. And even Marquette to Ishpeming is a huge difference in trail style. Marquette has the longer climbs, longer descents, and Ishpeming is this short, punchy, technical stuff.
Yeah, epic loop.
Definitely.
So good. You talked about Brent in the championship series, and I'm kind of sad that that's no longer around, because that was another motivating thing, was to do races in that and collect your points. So we need someone in Michigan to put another mountain bike series together now that he's kind of stepped down.
Yeah, Fun Promotions back in the day was a gem. Like, without Fun Promotions, I don't think I'd be where I am right now. Again, we had a great group of people, great group of juniors competing against one another. We did have a couple fast guys in Scott Quiring, John Meyer, Jason Swatlowski. Like, those three guys were the top of the sport in Michigan. And then Scott was also doing World Cups at that time. And I distinctly remember being at a race in Boyne, and I heard these group of guys whispering about Scott Quiring just won some race in Wisconsin called Shawamagon. And I was like, what is Shawamagon? That sounds crazy. That sounds like a hard race. Maybe I'll do it one day. That was my thought. Maybe it was 97 or 98 that Scott won that race. But I remember those guys were like blown away that Scott Quiring won Shawamagon. Because I think the previous couple of years, it was like Greg LeMond who was winning Shawamagon. So when Scott went up there and battled with Gene Oberpiller, it was Midwest. That, the making of a Midwest legend at that time. And, I guess you could say that Scott was one of the kind of pioneers who kind of paved the way for our group of juniors to be doing national races, Norba races, and World Cups back in the day.
That's a cool little background I didn't know about right there. I like that story. I'm going to shift gears on you a little bit, and we're getting close to the end, so I don't want to take up your whole day.
I could probably talk all day long. I got a lot of stories.
Right? Do you, or have you ever incorporated any strength training into your routine?
Strength training is an interesting one for me right now. I would say back in the day, I would do some strength training in the off season. And personally at that time, I felt like it didn't do anything for me. Like I would then race the next year and be like, nothing changed, not stronger. We didn't have power meters, but there was no feeling of like, oh man, I'm stronger because I did squats and leg presses in the off season. So for a long time, I did not do any strength training in the off season. So the sport of mountain biking has definitely shifted a lot over the years. Like back then, the mountain bike races, like that sea otter I was telling you about in 2001, that was a 2 hour and 45 minute or a 3 hour race. That was the normal race. I did a mountain bike World Cup in Mazatlan, Mexico, and I think the finish time was 2 hours and 45 minutes. So back in the day, we were racing long mountain bike races. And I think, yeah, in the mid 90s, early 2000s, the training philosophy was a little more old school. It was a little more go ride your bike as much as possible and gain bike fitness. So now, mountain bike racing, especially at the World Cup level, is shifting to an hour and 15 minutes to an hour and 20 minutes. And the courses are becoming extremely physically demanding. There's jumps, there's features, man-made and natural, and you have to be able to control your bike at a much higher intensity level versus back in the day, we would do 2 long laps and each lap would have a 1 hour climb in it. So you just settle in and climb for an hour back in the day. So now that the mountain bike racing has changed to be more explosive, more physically demanding, shorter and more intense, there's definitely a trend of more weight training for the athletes, more gym time for the athletes at a high level. So with my coaching, I'm definitely incorporating more strength training these days. And with myself as an athlete who, 44 years old, coming up on 45 years old, to be able to maintain that core strength, maintain an injury free body that is getting older, I've found that weight training, or at least, like a yoga routine or some core work on a daily basis, weekly basis, is more and more important.
And speaking of training, what do you feel is the biggest waste of time when people are training?
Coffee shop rides.
Donuts and coffee?
Yeah, pretty much. Like I've I guess my career has never necessarily been like the pro factory ride. Like I was never on the pro factory team. So it was more of a privateer from the very beginning. Even when there was factory teams, I never quite got into that scene. I always kind of wanted to do my own thing, pick my own races, do my own program, hang out with my wife, travel with my wife. I didn't want to necessarily travel with my wife and me stay with the pro team and her have to get her own hotel. Just
Right.
didn't quite work out for me. As an individual who might have also always had to have a part-time job, not on this pro team, not making a huge pro salary, I had to get back to work. I had to get back to my coaching or get back to my part time job at UPS. So I didn't have the luxury of going out for a 7 hour training ride and stopping for 2 hours for coffee, or start with a coffee shop, then drink your coffee, then go for a ride and stop for lunch. And then, so for me and my philosophy, it was I've got 3 hours. I need to make the absolute most of this 3 hour window while I'm on my bike. I've always been a proponent of quality training over quantity. And so when I see guys stop for coffee shop rides in the middle of a ride, one, I'm either jealous, like, oh man, I wish I had the time and luxury to do that, or two, I think to myself, man, they could have been training for an extra half an hour. It could have been, you know, 50 more TSS or, whatever it is, 500 more kilojoules burned. Like, so quality over quantity, and coffee shop rides they're great and they're a luxury, but definitely kind of a waste of time in my book. And when I see some of the young juniors, these young juniors head to Tucson and they're heading out for their coffee shop ride, I'm like, oh man, you guys got to be putting in the work. You're just young. You haven't earned the coffee shop ride yet.
That's funny. I don't do coffee shop rides because I work, and I think that what you just said is how I have to be. I have a limited amount of time to get my training in, between clients. So just before you, I just did my strength training, my lifting weights, and then after we get off this, I'll have a few clients, and then I'll try to squeeze in a ride before I have to get the kids off the bus, right? So yeah,
Yep.
no,
Yep.
no
And that's
coffee
my,
shop.
the majority of the athletes that I coach are in that same boat. They are working full-time jobs, they have kids, they have families, they have other commitments. So again, like when you're probably like 99% of the people, you don't have time for the coffee shop ride. If
No.
you are that 1% of that athlete who has made it to that level where they are doing this full-time professionally, and you got the luxury of that coffee shop ride, again, I'm probably jealous. I wish I could have probably done more coffee shop rides. It's a luxury, and you got to put in a lot of hard work to make it to that level to earn those coffee shop rides.
What do you feel is the most important thing to do after a hard workout or a race?
You got to realize that recovery time is as important as the training time. And you've got to find that balance in life. So I've coached so many guys who are willing to put in the work. They're willing to do the base miles and the intervals, make that commitment to the training, but they never understood that flip side of how critical the recovery was. So if you're not recovering from those hard training efforts, you're going to dig yourself a pretty deep hole that's going to be very challenging to get out of. So when I finish a hard training ride, I'm trying to at least dedicate the next hour of my time to getting a good recovery meal, taking care of my body by doing some stretching and some massaging, and maybe even trying to do a 15-minute nap or meditation session before I get back to work and kind of continue on with my life.
I think that's great information. And you are 100% correct. If you don't give yourself the recovery that you need, you said you're digging yourself into a deep hole, and that deep hole leads to overtraining, I think.
Definitely.
If there was one race that you could do over again, what would you have done differently, and what race would that be?
I wouldn't have slowed down when Travis Brown said, "Hey, slow down." that
2001 Sea Otter.
Yeah, 2001 Sea Otter. There was one Wisconsin road race state championship where I made a mistake, and there's a road racer in Wisconsin named Billy Jones, and he won that race. And at the time, I was so mad at myself. Like, man, I can't believe Billy Jones beat me in that race. Like, what was I thinking? There's Iceman in 2021 going up that final climb, battling with Alexi, Kerry Warner, and Cole Patton.
Mm.
In my head, I hesitated for 2 seconds. And during that hesitation, Cole made a move on the right. And basically, I was blocked in up that icebreaker climb. Like, there's so many moments in my career where I wish I could have a redo. I wish I could do something a little bit different. But at the same time, those moments are what you learn from, and those moments are what motivate you for so many years to come into the future. Like, I really feel like I could have won that Iceman if I would have attacked at that moment, but I hesitated. I didn't have the confidence on that day. I probably thought I was an old man racing with Alexi and Cole, these young guns, and Carrie on a gravel bike who was faster than me up that last climb. But if I would have attacked, I probably could have won. Every time that I did win Iceman, I attacked with zero hesitation, and the end result was a win. There's other Icemans. I did one with Kabush and Sam Schultz, going into the finish. I didn't do anything. I just kept telling myself, just wait for the right moment, wait for the right moment. That moment disappeared. And I didn't win. I got third because I waited. So
Right.
those races where I could have a redo, I've done so many. I would love to redo so many of them. But at the same time, I wouldn't want to change a thing because I learned so much from those mistakes. And I know for years, it's the silliest thing, but road race state championships in Wisconsin, losing to Billy Jones was like maybe one of the most insignificant races of my career. But for whatever reason, it motivated me for like 5 or 6 or 7 years. It was just one of those things like I could think about it and my adrenaline would like pump and my heart rate would go up and I'd go out and crush a training ride. And it was this tool, again, an insignificant race, but I use it as a tool to motivate myself for multiple training rides.
Have you seen The Last Dance with Michael Jordan?
I have, yes.
So sounds like something pretty similar. He would just pick something or sometimes even make something up to motivate and fuel him for upcoming games and events. So I agree. I think learning from those and fueling the fire.
Definitely. And I don't think it happens. I don't pick that moment. I don't say, okay, I'm going to use that for motivation because there's been so many of them, but some of them just like hit me for whatever reason.
Yeah.
And that is what motivates me. And that's kind of like, a lot of people ask me, what's your favorite Triple Crown? Ordashore, Schwamagan, or Iceman? And it's must be Schwamagan. You've won that one so many times. You've won that one more than any other Triple Crown. Is that your favorite? And it always for me goes back to Iceman. And then why is Iceman your favorite? I don't know. It just is. For me, that's the race that motivates me year after year after year. And Iceman is definitely a special race, but for me, there's no one reason why Iceman stands out in my world as like that one race that motivates me forever. It just is, and it motivates me, so I go with it and I run with it, and I'm gonna again try to shoot for those 50 Icemans.
It's definitely a special race. It's unmatched with its atmosphere, I think. This year, upcoming, well, actually this year right now, what's on your calendar, and maybe talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, so I actually just did my first race of the year 2 or 3 days ago. It was the second round of the Arizona Mountain Bike Series, MBAA. I got the first race of the year under my belt. It was pretty ugly, to be honest. Last year was a challenging year from a personal standpoint with a lot of health issues with my wife that ended up taking a toll on me, like physically and mentally. So it was a challenging year in 2022, which led to the necessity of having a longer off season this past year. So I pretty much haven't ridden my bike more than 10 times since Iceman. It's been a really long off season, and I really need to like let myself physically recover from last year and mentally recover from last year. I've taken a little more time to like see a physical therapist and work out some imbalances, work on that off season strength stuff that we were talking about earlier. So I jumped into this first Arizona race, and I definitely feel like I've got a lot of work ahead of me to get back to that level. But the schedule itself is probably going to be pretty similar to previous years. I'll probably do a couple more Arizona races. I'm going to head down to Puerto Rico to maybe jump in one of those UCI races that's down there in early March. I'll be focused on Whiskey 50 again. That'll kind of be the first big race of the year. Usually after Whiskey 50, we transfer back to the Midwest and Wisconsin for the summer. There's a UCI race there in mid-May. Into June, I kind of like take a little bit of a mid-season break to do the junior mountain bike camps up in Houghton. Those camps have now grown to, from that first camp was 10 kids. It's now 2 camps of 25 kids each, and it sells out online. Like one of the crazy bike races, you got to like be on your computer at 8 a.m. February 15th to log into Brian Motter's junior mountain bike camp, which is absolutely insane to me. But yeah, mid-June, I'll do those junior mountain bike camps and then kind of refocus after that for U.S. Mountain Bike Nationals. They're getting ready to make the big announcement where that race is going to be this year, no longer at 9,000 feet altitude. So I'm a little more motivated for that one. And then it's into the Triple Crown season and cyclocross season.
Sounds like a full schedule.
Always.
If you were to give advice to younger athletes that look up to you, what would it be?
It's got to be, keep things in perspective, keep things fun. Mountain biking is a sport that we're all privileged to do. It's a low-key sport. It's a great sport that you can do for your entire life. You can do it as long as you want. So if you can keep it fun, keep a bunch of variety in it, don't take it too seriously. I think that fun factor and that variety is kind of the spice of life, and that's what's going to keep you on your mountain bike and racing mountain bikes for a long time.
Great advice from the veteran, for sure. Is there anything else that you'd like to say before we sign off? You have any final thoughts?
No, it was a good morning chatting with you. I don't think about all these old stories often. So it's refreshing for me to always remember my roots, remember those days back at the Pato, remember those races. I mean, 2001 Sea Otter, that was 22 years ago. I hadn't thought about that race in quite some time. So yeah, it was just a great morning chatting with you, remembering some of those old stories and refreshing my love for the sport again.
I love hearing the old stories, or even, just from last year's stories. I like digging in and just listening to what the athletes have to say. It's fun for me. So I appreciate you telling them. If people want to connect with you on the web, where can they connect with you?
I've got my Instagram going. I think that's so. Here's one final story. Back in the day, like I was kind of anti social media when it was first starting. Like I didn't want to get on. It's probably like the 26-inch mountain bike wheel, right? I didn't want to upgrade to the 29er. I didn't want to get Facebook. I didn't want to send a text message on a cell phone, but eventually you have to adapt. So my buddy at Trek, Matt Shriver, he's like, dude, you need to get on social media. I was like, I'm not getting on social media. It's like, fine, I'm going to do it for you. So he created a Twitter at the Wisco Disco, an Instagram at the Wisco Disco, and started like putting up these fake posts. And I was like, oh gosh, come on, Shriver. We can't be doing that. Fine. I'll do it. So that was kind of the beginning of my social media career. It was like forced family fun. So yeah, Instagram at the Wisco Disco. And then, every once in a while I check in on the Facebook to see if I have any messages there, because I often get messages there, for coaching clients. So those are probably the 2 best methods right now to get a hold of me.
Very nice. And if someone has a kid that maybe wants to go to your camp, do you have a website for that?
www.juniormtbcamps.com, and junior is just JR. So www.jrmtbcamps.com.
Perfect.
So that registration for that camp in Houghton does open February 15th, and there's 2 weekends, mid to late June. And registration has been filling up fast for those camps. I did a camp I guess it was 2022. I launched a junior mountain bike camp in Puerto Rico as well. That website gives some details on that. And maybe when things settle down with the racing career, I'll launch another junior mountain bike camp in Prescott here, and maybe somewhere else across the country. So that could be the future after bike racing is doing a few more junior mountain bike camps.
That'd be cool. I'm sure people would enjoy that especially with yours filling up already now. Sounds like you need to open up a couple more anyway.
Yeah, there's definitely a demand. So my time is what's limited. If I'm trying to coach and do camps and race at the top level, I run out of time a little bit. So we'll see what happens in the future with that one.
Nice. Well, Brian, I've had a great time with you on the podcast today. Thank you for the tips along the way and being open for questions and giving suggestions for racing. I also appreciate your time today to have this discussion and share your epic journey on the mountain bike.
Awesome. Thank you very much. Again, it was great chatting with you. Yeah, it was great for me to relive some of those memories again.
This was a lot of fun. And to all the listeners, gratitude. You have just listened to Unpacking the Athlete.